What has been the most badass thing done by real people in history? Event 1. A British pilot in World War I was flying a scouting mission when he was attacked by 7 German planes. On the first pass, his leg was blown off by the German planes, but he managed to move the plane so his rear gunner could fire on the German fighters. They managed to drive off all 7. The pilot managed to land the plane despite rapidly losing blood and insisted that he delivered his reconnaissance report before receiving medical attention. His back gunner had no idea he'd lost his leg until they landed. The pilot won the Victoria Cross for his actions. The pilot's name was Ferdinand West. He survived the war and lived until 1988. Event 2. The life of Peter Julian Ortiz is a long string of these. He was an absolute mad lad who sounds like a character straight from a James Bond film. He was a dual citizen of France and the United States, French father, American mother, a combat veteran of the French Foreign Legion, a U.S. Marine Corps officer, and the most decorated operative of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to the CIA, in the Second World War. While serving with the OSS and operating with the French resistance in a German-occupied France, he was once tasked with rescuing downed British Royal Air Force aircrew. Unfortunately, the Germans got there first. Undeterred, he donned a German officer's uniform and used the German he had picked up while a prisoner of war. He was captured while serving with the Legion during the German invasion of France, later escaping with the help of an Austrian nurse he'd seduced, to bluff the soldiers holding them captive into releasing them into his custody. But wait, there's more. There was still the issue of getting the downed Royal Air Force aircrew out of German-occupied France. He did this using cars he stole from the Gestapo's own motor pool, at a time when the Gestapo knew he was actively hunting him, and had a cash bounty on his head. He then used the Gestapo's vehicles to safely drive the British aircrew past German army checkpoints and across the border into neutral Spain. Other highlights from his career was that he believed the presence of a uniformed Allied officer bolstered the morale of the French resistance. So, when leading the Maquis on sabotage missions or ambushes of German troops, he'd wear his U.S. Marine Corps officer's uniform openly, in German-occupied France. On another occasion, while eavesdropping on German officers in a French bar, something he frequently did in order to gather intelligence, he heard one of them drunkenly curse the local resistance, the American operative that had been spotted with them, him, and President Roosevelt. Rather than simply ignoring it, Ortiz slipped back to a local safe house, changed into his U.S. Marine Corps uniform, equipped 2 pistols and a raincoat to conceal his uniform. He then returned to the bar where he ordered a round of drinks for the officers, shrugged off the raincoat revealing his uniform, leveled his pistols at the astonished German officers, and ordered them to raise a toast to the United States Marine Corps and President Roosevelt. Once the officers had completed their toast, he donned the raincoat again and escaped into the night. Some versions of the story claim he killed the officers, but Ortiz denied it, saying he thought it better to keep them alive, as they would repeat the tale of how they'd been humiliated by the OS agent they were hunting, and it would undermine morale. Event 3. Witold Pilecki. His mission at Auschwitz is one of the most extraordinary acts of bravery in World War II history. In 1940, Pilecki, a member of the Polish resistance, volunteered to infiltrate Auschwitz by allowing himself to be captured during a Nazi roundup in Warsaw. Under the alias Tomasz Serafiński, he endured brutal conditions and unimaginable horrors upon his arrival at the camp. Once inside, Pilecki organized a clandestine resistance network called the Union of Military Organization. He meticulously documented the daily atrocities, including the mass executions and the inhumane living conditions. His reports, smuggled out through couriers, were among the first comprehensive accounts of the Holocaust to reach the Western Allies and the Polish government in exile, providing critical intelligence and calling for action. After nearly 3 years of enduring and documenting the camp's horrors, Pilecki realized that an internal uprising was impossible without external support. In April 1943, he orchestrated a daring escape with 2 fellow inmates. Despite the constant threat of capture, he made his way back to Warsaw, where he continued his resistance activities. Pilecki's detailed reports on Auschwitz were instrumental in informing the world about the genocide occurring within its barbed wire fence. Event 4. In 75 BCE, a band of Cilician pirates in the Aegean Sea captured a 25-year-old Roman nobleman named Julius Caesar, who had been on his way to study oratory in Rhodes. As the story is related in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, the capture was a minor inconvenience for Caesar, but very bad luck for the pirates. From the start, Caesar simply refused to behave like a captive. When the pirates told him that they had set his ransom at the sum of 20 talents, he laughed at them for not knowing who it was they had captured and suggested that 50 talents would be a more appropriate amount. He then sent his entourage out to gather the money and settled in for a period of captivity. The pirates must have been dumbfounded. It's not every day that a hostage negotiates his ransom up. Caesar made himself at home among the pirates, bossing them around and shushing them when he wanted to sleep. He made them listen to the speeches and poems that he was composing in his unanticipated downtime, and berated them as illiterates if they weren't sufficiently impressed. He would participate in the pirates' games and exercises, but he always addressed them as if he were the commander and they were his subordinates. From time to time, he would threaten to have them all crucified. They took it as a joke from their overconfident, slightly nutty captive. It wasn't a joke. After 38 days, the ransom was delivered and Caesar went free. Astonishingly, Caesar managed to raise a naval force in Miletus, despite holding no public or military office, and he set out in pursuit of the pirates. He found them still camped at the island where he had been held, and he brought them back as his captives. When the governor of Asia seemed to vacillate about punishing them, Caesar went to the prison where they were being held and had them all crucified. Event 5. Napoleon Bonaparte coming back from Elba, meeting up with the 5th Regiment of Infantry, sent from Paris to kill him. Steps off his horse with no weapon, walks towards the regiment and shouts, "Soldiers, recognize your emperor. If any of you wants to kill me, here I am." The soldiers drop their weapons and send their hats flying, shouting glory to the emperor. This has got to be the most insane natural 20 on a charisma check in history. Event 6. Roy Benavides. On May 2, 1968, a 12-man Special Forces patrol, which included 9 Montagnard tribesmen, was surrounded by an NVA infantry battalion of about 1,000 men. Roy Benavides heard the radio appeal for help and boarded a helicopter to respond. He was a former member of the United States Army Special Forces who was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Vietnam. He is best known for surviving the impossible as he went to save his outnumbered comrades. The helicopter couldn't land because of the intense small arms fire, so he jumped from the hovering helicopter around 30 to 50 feet in the air armed with only a knife. He then had to run 75 meters to his comrades, where he was shot in the leg and face on the way. Once he got there, he started rescuing his squad mates, and while he was doing so, got shot in the gut and took a grenade to the back. After all of this, he was miraculously still mobile and still going. Roy then found out the helicopter he previously jumped from had crashed, so he went and rescued the wounded pilot from the wreckage and proceeded to call in airstrikes and call for another rescue attempt. He was then shot in the thigh a couple more times, and on his trip to the backup rescue chopper he engaged in a battle with an NVA soldier who stabbed him with his bayonet. Benavides pulled it out, drew his own knife, killed him and kept going, leaving his knife in the NVA soldier's body. He later killed 2 more NVA soldiers with an AK while providing cover fire for the people boarding the helicopter. Once he finally made it back to the chopper, he then allowed his comrades to pull them in when they arrived back to the base. A doctor came and examined him but believed Benavides was dead. The doctor was about to zip up the body bag when Benavides managed to spit in his face to show that he was alive. Benavides had a total of 37 separate bullet, bayonet, and shrapnel wounds from the 6-hour fight with the enemy battalion. Event 7. The chef on the Titanic, who spent the whole time helping others off, then, as the ship was sinking, drank a ton of wine, and survived thanks to the alcohol keeping him warm and stimulating his system. Here's some context. Charles Juffin was the chief baker, not exactly chef. He knew that he wouldn't be saved, so had a drink of liquor, helped others off the boat, and then returned to his cabin and drank more. Having yielded a seat on a lifeboat, he then threw deck chairs and other objects off the boat, in the hopes that they would act as floats for those in the water. One of the last to enter the water, and also apparently a competent swimmer, he swam in the water for 2.5 hours. He did find a lifeboat at that time, but it was full. He suffered no serious injuries. I always assumed that the alcohol had something to do with his survival, but as pointed out, it actually makes you lose body heat, vasodilation giving the illusion of warmth, so I guess his survival was up to keeping a cool head. Event 8. Malunka Savic did Molan before it was cool in the First World War, and went to war instead of her baby brother. was a deadly accurate shooter but also liked strapping bombs to herself and jumping into and decimating enemy trenches. Most decorated female soldier in the military history of the world. She only got found out because she took a grenade to the chest and promptly refused to spend the rest of the war as a nurse, deciding to go back to trenches instead. She got wounded 8 more times before the war was over. Event 9. Lieutenant John Robert Fox, U.S. Army, Second World War. He and his forward observer party were holed up in a small town in Italy, where Germans began to overrun the town. He knew that reinforcements wouldn't arrive in time, so he radioed for an artillery strike on his position. His battalion commander objected, but Fox pressed on. Eventually, the strike killed over 100 German soldiers, but delayed them long enough for Allied forces to arrive. Fox and his party were killed in the strike, but many lives were saved. This happened in 1944. The sad part is that he was denied the Medal of Honor until 1997 because Lieutenant Fox happened to be black. Event 10. In 1944, Eliyahu Itzkovitz, a Jewish kid from Romania, watched his entire family get massacred by a concentration camp guard during Second World War. He remembered the guard's face so he could seek revenge. After the war, he found his camp guard's son and stabbed him with a butcher's knife. He was caught and sent to a juvenile detention center for 5 years, until Communist Romania allowed him to emigrate to Israel. After being drafted into the Israeli Defense Force, he somehow managed to find out he was serving in the French Foreign Legion in Indochina. He deserts the Israeli Defense Force, joins the Legion, manages to get deployed to Indochina and goes so far as to be in the same squad as the camp guard. He was the squad leader. The guard did not recognize him. He volunteers to go on patrol with his family's killer. When he manages to separate the two from the rest of the patrol, he announced who he was and finished the guard. After his enlistment, he got sent to prison, not for the murder, but because he deserted the Israeli Defense Force. He served 1 year in prison. Worth it. Event 11. Stanislav Petrov, the man who saved the world from nuclear annihilation. During the Cold War in 1983, he was the commanding officer at an early warning satellite command center in Russia, whose system detected 1, and then another 5, nuclear missiles fired from the U.S. towards Russia. Protocol was for him to immediately warn his superiors, who would launch a rapid full counter-assault against the U.S. within minutes of the threat detection. However, Petrov hesitated. He was confused as to why the U.S., if they indeed intended to attack Russia with missiles, would only fire 6 instead of a full-scale missile attack. He chose not to follow protocol and report the attack, which prevented Russia from firing their counter-launch. He declared that the system must have been reporting a false alarm, given how few missiles the U.S. were firing. It turned out he was right. The early warning detection satellite system falsely detected the sun reflecting off of clouds as U.S. missile launches. This incident remained classified for 15 years, before being made public in 1998. He is credited as being the man who saved the world. Event 12. After multiple failed assassination attempts by the Soviets, Joseph Broz Tito sent a letter to Stalin saying, "Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, 1 of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send one to Moscow, and I won't have to send a second one." There were no further attempts. Event 13. Boudica. Her husband was one of the most powerful chieftains in Britain and an ally of Rome. He died without a male heir, so made his daughters his heir. Local Roman authorities ignored it, burned his village, and proceeded to attack and flog Boudica and her 2 daughters, figuring what was a woman gonna do? Well, she rallied her tribe and most of the locals, raised an army of tens of thousands, and proceeded to burn London and most of the Roman centers of power on the island to the ground. Event 14. Samuel Whittemore was 78 when the British attacked Concord in Lexington and were driven back to Boston on April 19, 1775. This is considered the start of the American Revolution. He was farming when he heard what had happened, and that the British were coming through Menotomy, now Arlington, so he went and got his musket and pistols and hid behind a wall. When a scouting party for the British appeared, he jumped up and finished 2, possibly a third. He was fired in the face, tearing part of it off. He was bayoneted several times and beaten with the muskets of the British. They left him for dead to retreat back to Boston, and he did die. Almost 18 years later, on Feb 2nd of 1793. Event 15. Faking your own death to enter a fortified city in a coffin, jumping out, killing the bishop presiding over your burial, opening the gates and pillaging the place with your Viking buddies. There are heaps of possible examples: horribly mutilated soldiers who, after their heroics, dragged their almost corpses back to base across huge distances, building a bridge across the Rhine in 10 to 12 days, reading the German tribes and then burning said bridge, being a famous Chinese general that finally gets cornered in a town by your enemy and their massive army, and then sit on top of an open gate playing the lute, making your enemy fear a trap and turning his army around are but a few that spring to mind. But I think I like the Viking one best. Event 16. Miriam Rodriguez Martinez. Her daughter was kidnapped and finished by the Mexican cartel. The police didn't lift a finger to help, so she tracked down and arrested 10 cartel members herself. She knew it would result in her death. She did it anyway. "I don't care if they finish me," Rodriguez told a friend, according to the New York Times. "I died the day they finished my daughter. I want to end this. I'm going to take out the people who hurt my daughter, and they can do whatever they want to me." Sadly, her words proved prophetic as she was finished by the cartel on the 10th of May 2017, which is Mother's Day in Mexico. Event 17. Operation Postmaster featured in the highly dramatized movie The Ministry of Unhomanly Warfare. Led by Major Gus March Phillips, they managed to steal an important Nazi supply ship docked in a neutral port with 0 casualties. It was regarded as one of the earliest examples of Black Ops. Major Gus March Phillips was also one of the main inspirations for Ian Fleming's James Bond character, and the SOE with their quirky gadgets, shoes that leave false footprints, guns with silencers, and guns that are hidden in sleeves, was definitely the inspiration for how MI6 works in the movies. Event 18. My Great-Granddad. French prisoner of war during World War II, who, along with a friend, killed a couple Nazi guards, sweat their uniforms, and then somehow made it over to the U.S., where he met my great-grandmother. Side note, the Nazis would force him to make ammo as a prisoner of war, but right before the boxes were shoved to be sent off, he and his other prisoners of war would piss on the contents to make them corrode and be useless by the time they were actually opened. Event 19. Vasily Arkhipov, who was a Soviet naval officer. He was the only one in a 3-man nuclear submarine to stand and revoke the decision of the nuclear submarine from launching a nuclear bomb towards a U.S. ship that could have caused a potential nuclear war. Event 20. John Stapp strapped himself to a rocket in the desert and shot it off to measure how much deceleration G's the human body could take, at one point going blind temporarily, breaking his wrists, breaking ribs, and losing the fillings in his teeth. The test results were basically, did you die? And if not, he'd up the ante. He did this 29 times total. Pictures of the tests look like wild E-coiled rockets with a launch air on top. He held a land speed record with his rig, and another record for the most G-forces survived by a human voluntarily, 46.2 G. His research is what made ejection seats work for pilots, but also is used for airbags and car crash safety stuff. The guy saved untold lives, and continues to do so posthumously. Plus, he was a doctor, and seemed like a really nice guy. I can only imagine the amount of rocket force necessary to propel courage that big. That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.